Hello again, I am Blunty. This is an AMD RX VEGA 56, and this, well, that's a GTX 1070, and I thought it might be fun to mash these guys up against one another and see who comes out on top. I'm not gonna bog you down with the tech specs of this thing and read off the back of the box and list all the, the cores and the stuff and things that's got inside, or how many terrible flops it can do all at once. You can get that stuff elsewhere. I just wanted to show you what this card does. So let's do it. So here's the setup. I popped the RX VEGA 56 into my Ryzen 5 1600 rig, I ran a few canned benchmarks, and then I just started playing some games. I also tested it against its most direct competitor, the GTX 1070. In this case, specifically, it was an out-of-box overclocked Galaxy EXOC Sniper White Edition. In this video, I'll be showing you the 1080p tests, and in the following video, you can see the 1440p tests, both of which should be expected and common gaming workloads for where this card is positioned in the market. So, first off the bat, good old TimeSpy benchmark. Its listing is not validated, of course, because the card and drivers are pre-release, but a score of 6,100 flat is pretty damn respectable. During the test, the card wound up the fans, and they were audible but not obnoxious. Pretty standard fare for a blower-style cooler. I would personally wait for a board partner variant of the GPU, something with nice and beefy heat sinks like on MSI's Fruzor coolers, for instance, so the fans stay nice and quiet under load. But that said, even this stock blower cooler did great at keeping temperatures down and fans relatively quiet, only ever peaking at 61 degrees under benchmarking loads. But for some perspective on that score, here is the comparison to the factory overclocked GTX 1070. It's not a wide gap, but the VEGA 56 has the bigger number. So be ready to get triggered, Team Green fanboys. Not a bad first step for a card I was personally anticipating to be slightly below the 1070. After all, that's the way of AMD cards usually, much better value, and only a moderate step behind the Nvidia equivalent card. But it looks like VEGA might be about to shake up that status quo. On the Heaven benchmark, the scores flip though. Nvidia edges out. You'll notice though that the average was hinked by the lowest FPS values. The max FPS was near enough to identical, so that's interesting. With the Valley benchmark, there's a slightly wider gap for min and max, but they're still well within the neighborhood of one another. And again, worth remembering, this is a stock VEGA 56 against an out-of-box overclocked 1070. Superposition now, which is the newest benchmark from Unigen. For this, I selected the 1080p High preset, which seemed the most appropriate for this level of card, and it tells a similar story. A significantly lower minimum FPS value skewing the average score. I'd have to imagine that a more refined driver would iron out issues like this and bring the scores closer, but for right now, with these pre-release beta drivers, this is the story. But there's canned synthetic benchmarks, which are cool. They generate nice clean numbers for us to point to and match up, but then there's what people actually do with these things. Play games. In all examples I'll be showing you in this video, the games are maxed out at very high or ultra level settings as appropriate, 1080p full screen, and the recordings were done on a separate rig. GTA 5 first. It spends most of its time in the 70s, a lovely place to be for this game, and ideal for matching up with a FreeSync monitor to keep things nice and smooth and tear-free. When we compare it to the 1070 though, anticipation of a small gap in the Nvidia card's favour melts away. The cards go frame for frame most of the time, but the VEGA 56 does reach higher more often, even creeping up towards 90 FPS in low demand moments, while the highest I saw the Team Green card get was 79 FPS. And out of the car, that gap gets wider. The VEGA reached triple-digit frame rates here and there, while the Nvidia card remained very stable where it was inside the car. Both are generating an extremely pleasant playing experience, but yeah, for those who love to point to bigger numbers, the VEGA is, unquestionably, the better beastie here. We'll move on to project cars now. Again, everything maxed out except for motion blur, which I turned off because it makes me literally sick. Rather unexpectedly, here too we see the VEGA pull well out in front, up by 30 odd FPS in fact, which in a game like this can be pretty significant to how smooth the racing feels, and it's especially useful again with a FreeSync monitor. Rise of the Tomb Raiders benchmark is basically a wash between the cards, with a just over 100 FPS average score that's close enough to consider it a margin of error. Interestingly though, as opposed to the synthetic benchmarks from earlier, now it's the Nvidia card that has the lower minimum frame rates. And in actual gameplay, and it's worth noting this was the DirectX 12 mode, it's a close enough match that I'm comfortable calling it a draw. The Witcher 3. Like Tomb Raider, it uses Nvidia's special hand rendering magic, amongst other things, which historically has been a bit of a drag on AMD cards. But here, in Ultra settings, the gap that used to exist between red and green on this game specifically has closed. Nvidia still has a slight edge, but again, both cards keep the game running very comfortably above 60 frames per second for a flawless gameplay experience. Pushing into esports territory now, Overwatch was another interesting one, and another one where I had anticipated Nvidia winning out. And in fact, it did. But not by much, and not in any remarkable way. Both cards kept maxed out Overwatch deep in the triple-digit town, with Nvidia reaching closer to 200 FPS from time to time, while the VEGA stayed a bit more stable, hovering most often from 120 to 150 FPS. Call it a win for Team Green, but again, in practical terms, for the end user actually playing these games, the VEGA still delivers a flawlessly smooth gameplay experience.
I've got you in my sights.
Lawbreakers is up next, the newest arena shooter on the block, which I've not had much experience with outside of a few very short stints with the beta, so for the sake of this comparison, I'm just dicking about in the testing sandbox stage, not in an actual match. And here, it's basically a mirror image of the Overwatch result. This time, VEGA pulls out in front with a higher average frame rate, maintaining at 120 FPS pretty much the whole time, while the 1070 very occasionally hits the high 90s, but it too spends most of its time comfortably in triple digits. Watch Dogs 2 tells another similar story for a very different game type. Once more, both cards deliver a satisfying experience, though at the highest default settings neither could keep this pig of a game quite pegged above 60 FPS the entire time. But it is a fact that while the 1070 spent more time in the high 50s, even dipping to 40-something from time to time, the VEGA 56 spent a great deal more time in the mid to high 60s and even burying itself in the 70s fairly often. And finally, Battlefield 1, which you'll have to forgive the very bad gameplay. It was the very last game I tested of the evening. It was very late, I was very tired, and it's not a game I actually play, at all. But I had a code for it, and you folks did ask for it, so I did. Here it is. Cue your derision in the comment section at my impression of an idiot target in this game. But here again, remarkably, the VEGA outperforms the overclocked 1070, if only by a barely noticeable margin. The match is very close, and really, again, for any practical purpose, the gameplay experience will feel the same to any end user. But the VEGA does have a slightly higher number, a little more often.
Objective butter.
And rolling back to where we started, historically AMD have been the better value but slightly slower than the closest Nvidia competitor card. But here we see a factory clocked RX VEGA 56 matching and indeed very often outperforming a factory overclocked GTX 1070 in real world gameplay. While the artificial benchmarks hand an advantage to Team Green, which again I think may evaporate a bit with some driver patches, there's a case to be made for the argument that sure, AMD have only just now matched Nvidia punch for punch, and it took a year, and the VEGA is more power hungry, and the fanboy types will keep arguing around in their pissy little circles over and over and over ad nauseum and never really convincing one another of anything. Meanwhile, out in the real world, if you're making a choice right now about what GPU to upgrade to, or indeed to build a new gaming rig around, RX VEGA 56 is absolutely, unquestionably competitive with the highly popular choice of a GTX 1070. The VEGA 56, which has a price tag of $399 American smackers, generally beat an overclocked GTX 1070, which even now has a current price tag of $450 yank bucks. So, significantly cheaper, and quite often a little bit better. So, AMD's Ryzen put it back in the game in a big way on the CPU side of things, forcing Intel to be honest once again. And it seems like the RX VEGA cards are going to do exactly the same thing for the folks over at Team Green. It's time to pay attention again. Things are about to get real exciting in the world of graphics cards. Thanks for watching. I am Blunty, and I'll catch you next time.